Good evening and welcome to Go Vote Omaha. My name is Terry Crawford. I am Public Policy Director with the League of Women Voters. I have two wonderful guests tonight and we are going to have a discussion regarding Census 2020. Tonight we have with us Julia Zai with Voices for Our Children, and we also have Brad Christian-Sallis with Nebraska or Civic Nebraska. So tonight we're going to have a discussion regarding Census 2020. As you know, April 1 kicks off Census 2020 for everyone who will participate this year. And I guess that's one of the things we'll talk about is participation, what that looks like locally, some of the national conversations that have taken place regarding the census. So we'll get right into the questions. Julia, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your organization and some of the things you've done locally regarding Census 2020?
Sure. So Voices for Children in Nebraska is a nonprofit that's been around for just over 30 years. We were founded by a former foster parent who spent a lot of time doing case-by-case advocacy for the children that she welcomed into her home. And then she eventually figured out that the best way to advocate for them would be to go to where the decisions are made about what happens to them. So today we are a policy, advocacy, and community engagement organization. Because we publish the Kids Count in Nebraska report, which is the most comprehensive source of data on child well-being in our state, we are obviously really concerned about the accuracy of those numbers that come out from the census. And we're also concerned about the implications that it has more broadly on funding for some of the programs that our children rely on and our communities rely on.
Okay. And Brad, why don't you tell us some about Civic Nebraska and some of the efforts that Civic Nebraska is involved in for Census 2020 and the effect that the work you do has on the community?
Oh yeah, so I'm Brad Christian-Sallis with Civic Nebraska. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit that's been around for about 10 years. And our work, we have 3 different areas, but it's all focused on civic engagement and keeping people involved in their community. So obviously their communities being counted and people in that community being counted matters a lot to us. I work specifically in our voting rights department, so a big thing with the census that we want to make sure is that people are counted so that we have a good redistricting process.
Okay. Can you talk some about what people can expect with the census? There's been lots of conversations about how that's going to take place, whether or not someone's going to knock on your door, if you can go online. Can both of you talk some about what that process looks like locally for individuals?
Yep. So there will be online as well as people will be able to answer the census by phone. And then there will also be people going out knocking on doors. My understanding of the process is that it will begin with online and people will be sent access codes where they'll be able to use those codes to go in and fill out the census. And then people who don't reply online will kind of be followed up with by the other methods.
Okay. And can each of you explain what you are doing to encourage participation in communities? I know you talked about a lot about the advocacy for children and the contact that you've had with children and families, and also some of the contact that you've had in the community as well, Brad. Can we talk some about how you are encouraging that participation, particularly this year?
Right, so as an organization, Voices is a part of a complete count committee that's being formed by a group of nonprofits. I think Civic Nebraska is a part of that group as well. That is a really important voice at the table as we're trying to figure out what's the best way to get the word out. And then beyond that, we are planning to educate our networks across the state about the importance of the census and why it matters to children.
Okay. And Brad, can you talk some about that?
Yep, so Civic Nebraska is also part of that group of nonprofits that are really coming together to take the lead and make sure we get a complete count here in Nebraska. Nebraska is in a weird position where we're one of the few states that doesn't have kind of a state-led complete count committee. So Civic Nebraska, Voices for Children, and a lot of other nonprofits have really stepped up to kind of fill that role.
Okay. And can we talk some about that committee? I know I've heard some things through organizations and being in the community and having conversations with individuals, maybe on an individual basis and a group basis, but there's not a lot of information available regarding this complete count committee. Can you talk some about how that came together, how both of your organizations became involved, and what some of those conversations are behind closed doors, if you will, about making sure that each individual in each county in Nebraska will be counted?
So it can look a little different. In our state, I know that there are other complete count committees that have been formed. Many of them are local cities because that's another population that should be really concerned about the amount of local funding that they'll receive. So there's also local community groups, and it can really be anybody who's interested and concerned about their local community in the upcoming census, and they can get together and become a committee. There's some training involved, but that's really who it can be. And as nonprofits, we naturally care about this issue every
Sure.
10 years because nonprofits are often the ones who have to fill the gaps in when there isn't adequate federal funding because of an undercount during a census. And we all work together on many other issues, so it seemed like a natural fit.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the numbers for an undercount, it ends up being a lot of money, like up to $400 million that Nebraska could lose out in federal funding. So I think all nonprofits kind of feel the need to make sure we get as close to a complete count as possible.
Okay. And can you talk some about, a little off script, talk some about how marginalized communities are being encouraged to participate and how this whole complete count could have an effect on those communities in particular?
Yeah, I think a lot of those communities you're talking about are the communities most in need of that federal funding. So it's really important that they are educated on the importance of the census. And I think one of the best ways to do that is really to reach out to community leaders who are already leaders in those communities and really asking them to encourage people to fill out the census. And that's something I would ask anybody whether you're deeply rooted in the community or just got there, just to talk to your neighbors and let them know the importance of the census.
Okay. Can each of you then explain what you are doing to encourage participation? We just talked about that. Can you explain the issues that we are seeing, excuse me, at the Supreme Court regarding the census, and how will that affect your work?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court made a decision earlier this month about the citizenship question, which has sort of taken over the discourse about the upcoming census. I think it's important to focus on the fact that the citizenship question will not be on the census, which is a huge victory for all of us. And now is the time to really pivot and say, what can we all do to ensure that all of our neighbors and everyone in our state can come together and figure out what to do from here. I think that there's a lot of damage that has been done in the way of heightening fears in communities and frankly terrorizing communities
Absolutely.
to feel that they cannot trust the government. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think we're still very concerned that people will still be hesitant to fill out the census accurately and completely.
Okay. And Brad, can you talk some about how it has affected some of the work that you're doing, and what are some of the things we can do to calm some of those fears in some of those communities to make sure that we do get a complete count?
Well, like you were saying, I think a lot of damage has already been done, and even for each person who doesn't fill out the census, even one person, that's $21,000 over the course of the decade that we could potentially lose out on. So I think really the big thing is just going to be educating people that the citizenship question isn't going to be on the census now. And another thing I think is really having leaders in the communities be the ones helping people fill out the census, even when it comes to getting the job, to go knock on people's doors. People are going to be a lot more open to that if it's their neighbor from down the street versus someone they've never seen.
Sure.
So I think that'll play a big role, is really people in the neighborhoods deciding we want to take action on the census and really talking neighbor to neighbor to get people to fill it out.
Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that question. And so why is this citizenship question such a big deal? Will it affect participation, do you believe? And since the Supreme Court has made this decision, we are aware of that decision, but those that are living daily and not necessarily paying close attention to what has happened with the Supreme Court may not know and may still have that fear that it may show up either on the census itself or in some other ways. So why is this such a big deal for communities?
So it's important to note that the Census Bureau has its own research that says that a census or a citizenship question on the census would fundamentally undermine the accuracy of their reporting. And in fact, the Census Bureau has information already about how many U.S. citizens there are in the country based on other surveys of the ACS, which is conducted annually. So there's really, I think it's pretty clear that there's no statistical need for this data because the Census Bureau itself has said in the past that there are other administratively simple ways to get that information. And I think that, it's clear that the battle's not over yet. I mean, obviously there are still efforts to sow fear about the question, but it will decisively not be there. So, I think the work continues. The more difficult work now is to do that education.
And again, a little off script, talk some about why it's important to get full participation in the census.
I think obviously funding is a huge thing, but then also representation. So we'll be drawing the districts that people use to vote and figure out who their elected officials will be. And so an accurate count is really important for that because that'll determine the size and the makeup of those districts and really make sure that people are picking their state senators and not the other way around.
Okay.
And we are particularly concerned because young children are the most likely to be undercounted. In 2010, it's estimated that we undercounted children, young children under the age of 5 by about 1 million. And children rely on many of the programs that we receive a considerable amount of federal funding for. So in FY 2017, Nebraska received $1 billion in Medicaid and CHIP funding, and children are the majority of the population that are served by Medicaid. 1 in 3 children in our state are on public health insurance, so this is a really, really important piece of funding. But beyond that, there's transportation funding, there's school funding, how we decide how many buildings to build for schools. That's another really important piece. So I don't think that we can understate how important this is. I could continue on and on beyond Medicaid and CHIP funding.
Okay.
And I think the other thing is that we'll kind of have to live with the results of the census for 10 years. So that's another thing that makes it really, really important to do right, is that we won't be able to just turn around the next year and do it again.
Sure. And then educating communities as to how important it is to participate in the census for 2020. What types of resources are available to kind of assist in that process?
So there are a couple of national organizations that have websites up that are up and running with different languages and resources. The one that I'm aware of is censuscounts.org. We hope that there will be more state-specific resources up and running in the future, but that's the first place that I would direct folks to.
Okay. And what about on a local basis? Are there places or gatherings where individuals can go to just get information as to what to expect when they participate in the census? And for those that want to do it electronically online, is there some place in particular where they can go? Say they don't have a laptop or a computer at home, public libraries or other facilities. Is that information readily available?
So there will be access to be able to do it at public libraries, but also coming up here soon is that group of nonprofits we were talking about. A lot of us will start doing things like having an extra laptop at events we do so that people can use that laptop to fill out the census, and also just having informationals where people can come and learn more information. Those we don't have solid dates for yet, but I know they'll be coming here soon, and they'd be available. We'd have information about them on our website, civicnebraska.org.
Okay. And I know individuals from having conversations myself, one of the questions that comes up quite often is whether or not the answers on the census are safe and confidential. Can both of you kind of address that issue?
In a word, yes, they are safe and confidential. Nothing about the laws that protect the confidentiality of census data has changed. It's been that way for decades. The Census Bureau cannot share any information from the data, and its employees may not either. And if they do, they can risk a criminal charge. So it's very secure.
Okay. And is that information that is generally available? Say someone knocks on your door and someone is hesitant to participate. Are they allowed, or is it part of the process that they have that conversation regarding the confidentiality?
I can't say for sure whether that conversation about confidentiality will happen, but that's why I think it's really important to have people from the community being the ones doing the census, because not only will they tell people that, but people also really be able to believe it in a way you necessarily won't with a stranger.
Yeah, and I think it can sound pretty scary that somebody might knock on your door and ask you all this very personal information. It's worth pointing out that advocates believe that if you fill out the census online or over the phone and you complete most of your answers, that is to say that the majority of your answers are filled out, that nobody is going to come in person, so that might be a more comfortable option for folks.
Okay. Now, what issues do you want to address on this topic from your unique perspectives from each of your organizations?
I think that I've talked a lot about federal funding, but this really can't be overstated. It's worth pointing out that while this citizenship question issue has been out there, there have also been a number of other levers that the administration has been leaning on to undermine and break apart the public systems that we have put in place that are effective in keeping children out of poverty. And it's really important to pay attention to all these pieces, because underlying all of this is the accuracy that we get from our census numbers every year.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just reemphasize the fact that Nebraska could lose up to $400 million in federal funding, and then also the fact that the accounts we get from this census will be used to draw our districts, which are really important. When you want to go and vote, you need to know that your district is properly represented and every person in that district is being represented.
Okay. And we've talked some about the Complete Count Committee. Can you talk about why Governor Ricketts vetoed the bill that would have formed the committee?
I can't speculate too much on why Governor Ricketts vetoed that bill, but in his veto letter, he said that he felt it was unnecessary. So the original bill, as envisioned by Senator Matt Hansen, would have housed the Complete Count Committee under the Secretary of State, and the fiscal note was pretty minimal. It would have been administrative time, so like half of a FTE from the Secretary of State's office, and then reimbursements for mileage. I've served on enough committees and commissions in my time at work to know that that is really what can make or break coalition work and collaborative work, especially with the geographic size of Nebraska. To get a true statewide collaboration requires, at the minimum, some administrative work corralling all the cats together and then reimbursing folks for their time. So the bill was later amended to house that under the State Data Center, which is through our university. So I mean, there's not anything that can be done about it at this point, since the legislature has adjourned sine die, so all we can do is do the work.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why we all decided we needed to step up and make sure this gets done, because Nebraska is one of the few states without a complete count committee, so we kind of really have to fill that role.
Many other states have invested millions of dollars in this committee, so there's a lot of work to still be done.
Okay. If we want more information, what organizations are working on the education and engagement for Census 2020? And some organizations, in addition to yours, I know you're working collaboratively with others on the complete count, but also others that we can reach out to within communities to have this conversation and kind of soothe some of those fears that citizens may have.
So maybe the first place to suggest folks to explore is actually the Census's website. They have the full inventory of the committees that have been formed in the state of Nebraska. So if you see one in your community, perhaps you can contact the main contact person and get in touch. If you don't see one in your community, maybe you can be the one to create a committee and start the conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would definitely say reach out to Civic Nebraska if you do feel the need that you need to start a committee in your community, because we're willing to help out, and we're developing materials and one-pagers so that people who really want to do it on their own and make sure their community is counted are able to.
Okay. And Brad, can you tell us how, if someone wanted to reach out to Civic Nebraska to maybe have you come to speak to a group or to be engaged in that process of forming their own committee, how would that happen?
Probably the best way would just be to give me a call. Number's 402-312-3266. Definitely feel free to reach out. And then also anybody can go to our website, www.civicnebraska.org.
Okay. And Julia, we also want to make sure that we give a
Yes.
plug for your organization if individuals want to be involved collaboratively with Voices for Children.
Absolutely. So our website is voicesforchildren.com, and I can be reached at 402-597-3100.
Okay. I want to thank both of you for coming this evening so that we can have this open conversation about the census. There's been lots and lots of conversations locally, federally, about what the census will look like. Some were very concerned about that question, whether or not the Supreme Court was going to rule that, yes, it had to be on the census. And I think you're absolutely right, Julia. That was a wonderful, wonderful win for everyone. But I think there were still some fears that were stoked. And we have to do some things to kind of calm those fears as we approach April 1 to have this conversation and then start the process. So what would you say finally in our last few moments as to what individuals should do if someone shows up at your door?
The best thing that all of us can do to keep the power that we have and to keep the resources that we have in our community is to fill out the census for your household. And then after that, tell everyone that you know to fill out the census and explain to them the importance of an accurate and fair count in 2020.
And I would just remind everyone that they will get an access code to the website sent in the mail. So to hold on to that code, put it up on your refrigerator or something so you don't lose it. So when it's time to go fill out the census, you're able to do it right away.
Okay. The census is very important, just as voting is very important. We're doing Census 2020. We're also coming up on Election 2020. So that is a conversation we should also be having with individuals within the community. Mm-hmm. Within the Complete Count Committee, or also in your individual capacities, are we also having those conversations in conjunction with the 2020 conversation, 2020 census?
I know at Civic Nebraska we are. The big reason why we're so involved with the census is because of the role it plays in redistricting. So we want to make sure that everyone has their right amount of representation, and then we want to make sure that we're able to get them out there and get them voting and participating in our democracy.
Okay. Any last words?
Fill out your census.
Okay. I want to thank you both again so much for participating in Go Vote Omaha. It's always a wonderful opportunity to be able to get the information out to citizens, to let them know that there are individuals in the communities that is working collaboratively to be their advocate. You don't always see those individuals, but I am glad we had this opportunity to have your faces shown on Go Vote Omaha tonight in your organizations, so individuals know who they can contact, who to have those conversations with. Do not be afraid of the census. You should fill out that information because it could cost all of us as a community and as a state if we don't fill out that information. So thank you very much for everything that you have provided tonight, the information, and your participation is very much appreciated.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you so
Thank
much.
you for having
It's
us.
been a pleasure.
Is that a wrap? I'm not sure. Go vote.